going to talk for the next half hour about safety. Safety as it applies to the humans that work in the mining industry. Safety is always on the forefront of everybody's mind, and we know that today mines operate as safely as possible. They're engineering a variety of solutions to make mines safer, including autonomous vehicles, teleoperations. We heard a bit of that in our last panel. So to help me up here, I've got three experts in this space and other spaces who are going to join me for the conversation. Mauricio Casara of UNM, Mark Baker of Checkmark Consulting, and Joe Gladu of JG and Company Management Consulting. So guys, welcome. Join me on the stage. Good to have you. Yeah, they can sit anywhere.
Thank you.
This will work. Yeah. All right, so Mark, for no obvious reason, how has safety changed throughout your career? If you think about what a miner experiences today when they're onboarded and the safety protocols in place relative to what they have been in the past.
Well, if I go way back into the deep past, when I first started in the industry, safety was kind of an afterthought for the mining industry. Literally, back in the day when we were first working with the mining customers, you could drive your car not only through the guard gate, you could drive it into the pit. So you didn't, the training programs were pretty negligible in those days. MSHA wasn't enforcing much. So all of that's changed now. So from the days when you could literally stop a truck by getting out of your car and waving at the guy, today the systems and procedures they have in place make that impossible. So it's really become quite a safe environment as compared to back in the day. And unfortunately, the reputation of the mining industry hasn't caught up with that yet. The outside world still views mining as being unsafe. Well, it's related back to the early days when it was unsafe. But today, mining's made tremendous strides in improving safety.
And have you seen the improvements in safety as a gradual progression, where culture changed slowly as a function of time? Or are there any key technologies that you can think of that were really critical for making a leap in improving safety?
Well, I think in general, communications around the world, when people find out instantly that a problem exists somewhere, that really was driving the behavior. So they had accidents in the early days of mining, and it really didn't get out to the rest of the world. But subsequent, it kind of gradually changed until several major incidents occurred, one of them being the underground mine in Chile that they made a movie out of. So people really got a chance to see what it's like to do that. Well, that started driving behavior, and it really was driven not only from government regulations and so forth, but from the finance people. They didn't want to be paying companies money or lending money to companies that weren't safe.
Mauricio, what do you see as the big innovations in safety over the last 5, 10, 15 years?
When we talk about safety, I think that anything that can help the operators. We are open pit miners, we are mining contractors, so I'm talking from the perspective of a truck driver, of an excavator driver that's in the pit. Anything that comes out to improve the safety of that guy working at the mine is important. So I'll not name all the improvements that we have over the years, but notably over the past few years, collision avoidance and operator awareness, I think that are big things that happen.
Joe, would you comment?
Yeah, I joined the industry about 16, 17 years ago. When I got into the industry, I came not really knowing anything about mining. It had a number of assumptions about the sort of technology that you would just have in a mine. My pedigree is in underground mining, so I'll kind of give you that context on it. But when I got into the industry, I was amazed that the basic form of communication was two-way radio, that they didn't have pervasive connectivity for data and things like that. So over the last 15, 16 years, I've seen tremendous evolution with respect to the sort of near pervasive connectivity that you start to see in a lot of mines, and the technologies that can now sit on top of that and provide a number of solutions that make people safer, drive greater productivity and efficiency.
So we've heard a lot at this conference about the just sheer volume of data that are being produced from sensors that are monitoring every possible action at a mine. What are we doing with those data? Are we doing enough with those data? Are there too much data right now?
Yeah, it's a good question.
We store them in the cloud.
It's a good question because, again, if I reflect back to when I started in the industry, connectivity was part of what I was selling, right? And we were selling the plumbing. And the plumbing was going to give you the data, and everybody wanted the data. But they didn't really understand what they were going to do with the data. And now we kind of swing the other way. I think, there's an abundance of data. The biggest challenge that we have is a lot of that data is siloed from different systems. So there's a lot of great systems in there that serve a particular stakeholder. But when you try to combine the different stakeholders that can benefit from that data still remains very siloed. And the contextualization of the data, I think, is still a pretty big challenge in the industry.
Mark, any thoughts about how we process the data?
So the desire to collect data from the mining industry's perspective existed throughout my career. When it first started off, people were looking at, can I get the vital signs information off of haul trucks as they're running, and so that we can use that to predict or determine a potential failure. The actual, as you pointed out, the actual collection of data has evolved quite a bit. We have faster communications, we have intelligent buses on board vehicles, and even in the process end of the business. So getting the data, the technology to acquire data has really evolved quite a bit. The big problem is as you pointed out, is what does it all mean? So, and unfortunately in our industry, when you talking to, for example, maintenance group, well, we need to see all the vital signs data on a continuous basis. A, what good does it do you? B, who's going to be looking at all this data and determining what needs to be done? So it's really, I think we're at a stage now where it's how do you convert data to usable, actionable items or actionable information? And they're doing that in certain portions of the mining business, but at the end of the day, to get the true value out of it, it needs to take a next level up. We're still at the small stage of collecting data. We really need to take that next level up and look at the mining process, the entire process overall, and how to optimize that. And that'll require the integration of all these individual systems into something, but it needs, the solutions providers really need to look at it on a holistic basis to get value out of them.
Do you think the mining industry is allocating the right amount of time and people to do that?
I think this is going to require another level. The mining industry they're busy doing what they're getting paid for. They're busy working, moving material, processing stuff. So it's really not the miners. I think if I equate back to one of the early implementations that I was involved with back in the late 70s, early 80s, the mine manager said it really well. He said, I can tell when the engine's blown. I don't need computers and systems to tell me that. What I need is to know it's going to blow so I can prevent that. And that's really, we aren't quite there yet on a total mining environment perspective, and that's what needs to be done.
So Mauricio, as a contractor, what do you see as the next innovations that will help the mining industry become safer and improve operations?
One thing is this, is what to do with all this data that we collect. We collect data well, we have a lot of sensors, we collect a lot of data, but what do we do with it? So I think the next level will be that. Treat that data and make it useful. We treat some, we have some information, vital signs, we have the operator awareness, but what we do with all that? We improved a lot, but we are not we are not there yet. There's a long way.
Do we know what questions to ask, Joe? Or I'll rephrase that, what are the questions that we should be asking?
Yeah, I think if I kind of go back to the earlier point, just to kind of add to that, I think if we can take that data and we can now apply some level of learning to it, some sort of artificial intelligence. So rather than look at historically what has happened, use that as an input to identify patterns and predict where there could be incidents, and use that knowledge to make situations safer.
So if you were to think about companies doing that well, what, without naming the companies, what are those companies doing? You know, I'm reminded of stories about, for example, Isaac Newton, right? And when he, quote, discovered the concept of gravity was during the Black Plague. And so he was kicked out of his private school because they shut all the schools down, and that allowed him to move to the country to live in a wealthy relative's house and have time to just think. And I see through my kids, one of whom is right now becoming a data scientist and economics and an engineer, having the time to come up with the questions and call the data. You know, who's doing that well, and how are they doing that well?
Yeah.
I'll let any of you take that if you want.
I don't think anybody's doing it well, to be honest with you. I think there's a lot of people trying, but I think from a mining company's perspective, I'll qualify my previous statement, from a mining company's perspective, nobody's really doing it well yet. Because they're busy, once again, on doing their operations. I mean, what the main job of the people that work at the mining companies is to produce material, saleable material for a reasonable cost and make money. It'll take an entity like a Hexagon that can take a look as an outsider's perspective, has the time and resources to look at what all the information that's being collected, how it's going to be put together, and how to create value for the end customer. And really, most of the innovations have come from outside the industry, not inside the industry. And in my career, I've watched mining companies go in and out of, okay, nobody else is doing it, so we'll do it. And we'll do it ourselves. And then they suddenly realize that once they do something, those people have all moved out. It's not commercial. So it's specific for them, and they'll move out, and then it becomes unsupported, and they have to go do it again, and hopefully an outside firm. I think that mining companies have recognized that, but we still see the cycles between internal R&D and external R&D. But to me, the big change will come from outside entities like a Hexagon that can manage. They've already got systems to collect data and manage the data. It'll take experts to come in then and say, what does this mean?
Yeah, I mean, that's been a big change in the last 100 years, from when big companies did all of the R&D in-house, and now we're seeing a lot of innovation coming from startups, from smaller companies, where they're looking at all of these data, and they simply need to be guided with the questions. And ultimately, this affects profitability, right? I mean, a safe miner who doesn't ever lose a working hour means you're more productive. And so it really does also impact the bottom line of mining companies. Mauricio, if you think about changes that have happened in your experience as a contractor, can you give us an example of something that, you know, you've got an idea and you have a sense that it could have a positive impact on some aspect of what it is that you're being hired to do? And you just need the time, you just need the space in order to take that idea and have it actually become something tangible.
Yeah, I'm from the time that we could drive to the pit as well, so not that long, but that's it. The mining environment evolved, but we didn't evolve as fast as we need. All these sensors that we are talking about, all this data collection is happening on aviation for how many years? And I think that's come to something that Mark mentioned. The mining company is selling ore, is selling metals. And the aviation industry it has to be safe, has to take people from one place to another. It's different. I think that's what drives improvement in safety or whatever we want is the focus. The company has to be focused on that. Being a miner, you cannot focus on working on R&D and many details that you need to operate a mine safely. That's why you need to rely on external partners. And I think that we are getting there. We have a long way, but we are getting there. Like I mentioned on collision avoidance, we've seen earlier, most of the accidents that we have in open pit mines are related to, and underground as well, are related to collisions.
And do you perceive mining companies are receptive to this change when a Hexagon or someone else comes to them and says, we think we have a solution to a problem that you may not know existed, or we have a way to improve something that you already think is working well, and we can give it another 1%, 5%, 8%. Are mining companies receptive to this?
That's another good point. We find that sometimes in mining changes are not well received. No, I've been doing this my whole life. I do like this, and it's a little bit hard for us. The guys from Hexagon that know us know that we do things different. And sometimes to make the mining house to understand that different way to do things, more productive, safer, I don't know, if they believe that they can do better. It's like Couto was saying, don't try to be the most clever guy in the room. Just show what you have to do. I think that we can do better. We can, with diversity, involving other people, involving the operator that is there sitting on the truck, we can, if we listen to them, if we listen to the contractors, to the service providers, we'll do better.
What's the role for policy? You know, if I think back to data for the United States and we look, for example, at the workplace safety in underground coal mines before the Mine Safety Hazard Administration was created. And then if we look at the safety pre and post the Environmental Protection Act and the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Air Act amendments, you know, we see these big drops in lost productivity, in fatalities, and it seems to be a cause-effect relationship. Do you think we need policy to drive innovation in safety, or is it organically happening at startups and smaller companies and making its way to bigger companies?
I'm not sure whether getting more government intervention is always a great thing, because sometimes when they implement regulations, they don't understand the unintended consequences. I think that the mining companies in the last couple decades have started to take more of that on their own. And we find that the government, if you're doing things well, the government doesn't really want to get involved. So for example, when we were developing autonomous haulage in the early days, it was, okay, bring the government regulators in because this is changing substantially the way things are done. And the government's attitude was, we don't want to make rules and regs on that. What we want to do is see what you're doing and understand what you're doing. So if something does happen, then we know how to do something. So I think that I think it's all of the businesses have evolved to a point now where safety is a pretty predominant issue in all the mining companies. That may have taken a few decades longer than it should have, but it's there now. Most of the major companies, when you have a meeting like this, you start off with a safety share. At the beginning of the shift, the employees have safety shares. So safety has become a predominant thing as compared to when you and I got involved, and safety was a secondary portion of it. So I'm not sure the government is the right way to go.
Do you see any hot spots for innovation? You know, in the world of computer tech, we think about Silicon Valley. Do you see any hot spots globally? Great ideas, great new innovations, technology being birthed? You know, thinking here about different cultures around the world. We look at mining hotspots like Brazil, other parts of Latin America, Australia, Canada. You know, are you seeing any really significant areas in terms of what they're developing?
I'll give you an interesting perspective. So I gave a talk a few years ago, and one of the things I highlighted, and most people don't realize, mining is a leader in technology. So if you look at mining back in the day, back in the late 70s, we were the first ones to develop digital communications by radio, wireless communications, digital. We were the first ones to develop mobile computers that sat in the trucks, in the equipment. We were the first ones to develop location devices. We were the first ones in autonomy. The mining industry had autonomous vehicles before the auto industry even began to think about it. Unfortunately, the industry is relatively small as well. So although we developed all those technologies, we never really were able to leverage that out because we're a small industry. I like to say, if you look at all the haul trucks in the world and you add them all together, it's about equal to maybe 1 or 2 weeks worth of production in an auto factory. So just to give you an idea. So the auto industry took the idea of autonomy and went with it. Now they've got much better systems for doing that stuff, but look at the volume and look at the commercial model. The commercial model is hard to do in the mining industry, yet we were still the first. So I still think that we're going to see a lot of technologies come out of this group of people that will be evolutionary as well as revolutionary. It's just, so yes, I do see that happening.
Joe, let me finish with you. What do you see on the horizon? Whether it's surface mining, underground mining, autonomous positioning, what do you see on the horizon that is going to happen and is going to improve not only safety, but productivity, which is something we desperately need?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, if I kind of reflect on my experience in the underground industry in the short time that I've been there, I was frustrated when I got into the industry because yes, they were innovative, but the adoption of technology was really, really slow, and it frustrated me because I wanted to move at a quicker pace. But if we look back in the last 5 years, I think the industry has really accelerated their adoption of digital technologies and safety technologies alike. So if you look at autonomy, if you look at collision avoidance, we're really start to see those sorts of technologies take off. If you look at the adoption around software for operational execution and how that correlates to greater productivity, greater efficiency, but also if the work is planned, then it's going to be safer. So we're seeing the emergence of those technologies and the challenges of adoption. I think it's been proven. So the laggards are now looking at that and realizing that we're beyond the innovative stage. We're now into the early majority, kind of mid-majority stage of adoption.
Well, great. So, gentlemen, I really appreciate you spending some time with us this afternoon talking about safety and other aspects, how technology and data are being used to make the workplace safer for the people that pull the metals out of the ground for society. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.